Deputy Boyd Barrett.
We cannot have any further delay on this. This is compounding the already multiple injustices of the current housing crisis. Every single week, people are coming in, working people are coming into my office, and I'm sure it's happening everywhere else, who are being cut off housing lists. They may have been on those lists for 10 years, 15 years, and then they're just gone because they do a bit of overtime, because they get a slight pay increase, and they're cut off the list. That's just not acceptable, because now they're not even on a list where they won't get a house. They have no housing support available to them. And it's not just that they will be stuck in rented accommodation. In my area, they can't get the rented accommodation. They can't afford it. And it means working people, bus drivers, people on average wages, are being forced into homelessness and simultaneously off the housing list, or not being allowed on the housing list in the first place. So 2 months is just not good enough. What are you going to do for the family who came into me this week, who, because they did a bit of overtime, have lost 10 years on the housing list? 10 years. After they fought it, the council says, oh yeah, okay, maybe we'll put you back on the list, but you're losing your 10 years because they did a bit of overtime. This is bonkers. It's completely unfair. For years, social housing was about people who are ordinary working people who couldn't afford mortgages or couldn't afford the private rented sector. Now they are being excluded in large numbers and thrown off housing lists. What are you going to do about it?
Minister.
Again, I would be surprised if somebody was taken off the list for 10 years because they've done a bit of overtime, so I think the story mightn't just add up. But we'll check that, and I'm happy to look at it with you. I'm saying I would be surprised. We had a discussion about overtime earlier on and how that's judged as well. Just to be very clear, the reason there was a review of the guidelines and why there was a national standard set down was because, again, there was a different policy in every local authority prior to that. Different income limits, gross, net, different allowances for overtime, different allowances for child benefit and so on. There wasn't a fair system administered across the board. So we made sure that that did happen, that there is now a fair system. We agreed that it has to be reviewed. It is being reviewed. It will make changes. In the meantime, there are other supports to help people there that are over that income, and we just a discussion earlier on around the rebuilding home loan, which is working quite well. Nearly 500 applicants for it. Quite a lot of success there. It's a good scheme to help people who are in that bracket of income above the social housing limits. But also, as well as that, there's other schemes there in relation to try to deal with the pressure zones in certain areas as well. There is the funding for HAP. There's a working with the private sector to bring forward affordable housing. There is an affordable housing policy going through the system as well. Every local authority has been asked to bring forward proposals on that, to manage their land, to use that, and there's money being made available by Minister Murphy to open up that land and service that land as well. So there's a range of initiatives there. I'm only touching on a few. But we recognise, as everyone here recognises, that the income limits need to be looked at and adjusted. It will be based on evidence, it will be based on science like before, and the housing agency are gathering that work for us, doing the information. They'll make recommendations to Minister Murphy, and the changes will be made in the summer. That's where it's at. If I can click it and we think it will do it quicker, but it's important it's done right.
Yeah, just to ensure continuity, we'll take the final supplementary from Deputy Boyd Barrett and then Deputy Smith.
First of all, Minister, if you're telling me you can fix this case, I'll be very happy. But I'm telling you now, somebody who did a bit of overtime was taken off the list, and then after appealing and fighting it, they were said, OK, we're not accepting your appeal, but you can reapply. Then they were accepted, but they said you've lost your 10 years on the list. So they're back to the bottom of the list because they did a bit of overtime. That is completely unacceptable, right? So if you could sort that out, I'd be very happy. Beyond that, let me tell you, Minister, I have one case where somebody who's working has refused a €10,000 a year increase in pay, which they could get from their employer, because if they took it, they would be off the list, and housing in our area would be completely unaffordable to them, right? So they're actually refusing pay increases. Now, these limits haven't gone up since 2011. It's ridiculous. Wages are rising at the moment. They're not rising to the level that people can afford a house, but they're rising to take them above these limits. So they are being locked. There's a cull going on of people on the housing list who have no other alternatives. And it makes a mockery, by the way, I'll just conclude on this, of social mix. Because actually what you're doing is you're taking the people who traditionally benefited from council housing off the list, and meaning only the people on the very, very lowest incomes will be eligible for social housing. Where's the social mix in that? So you've got to raise these limits urgently, and you need to do something about people being lopped off for small increases.
Minister, 1 minute only.
Again, please don't misquote that I said I could sort it out. I said I doubt the story that somebody lost their 10 years.
Please, Minister.
I'm saying I'll check out the story because I doubt somebody lost their 10 years history over working a bit of overtime. So I'm saying I'm doubting how the story is being portrayed here.
Please, Deputy.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm happy to check it out. Again, to allow for social housing mix, that's something we're trying to drive through our department. There are a range of other schemes there which blend social, affordable, private housing on other state-owned lands. There are plans afoot there to bring forward enough land that they can build 50,000 houses through that mix of social, private and affordable as well, and people can benefit from that. But also, to allow for that mix above the recommended limits, there was a blanket increase of €5,000 above that recommended, which I know will be quite low in today's terms, and that's why we're agreeing to have the criteria looked at, but it will be based on evidence brought forward as well, because we do want that mix, and we do want to encourage people to be able to bring forward housing as well, and we certainly don't want schemes that people would turn down jobs or a chance of income. That's why the HAP scheme was brought in the first place, to recognise people's ability to get a job or to earn income, and you don't like that scheme either, but it actually works very well to reflect people's ability to work and to earn income. That's what it was there for, and you still give out every day of the week.
Deputy Brendan Smith.
You still give out every day.
Thank you, Deputy. My department and I are constantly monitoring the housing assistance payment data, as well as other key information relating to the private rental market. Indications that the current HAP rent limits and the flexibility to exceed those rent limits provide local authorities with sufficient capacity to assist households in securing rented accommodation that meets their needs. Indeed, increasing the HAP rent limits in particular local authority areas could have further inflationary effects on the private rented sector, which could have a detrimental impact on the wider rental market, including for those households who are not receiving HAP support. From data available at the end of the fourth quarter of 2017, approximately 46% of the total number of households in the Dublin region being supported by HAP were benefiting from the additional flexibility that was provided to local authorities to exceed the maximum rent limits. When the additional discretion available to homeless households is removed, 18.3% of HAP households were benefiting from the additional flexibility. In those cases, the average rate of discretionary payment being applied was 15.4% above rent limits provided. The average rate of discretion for homeless HAP scheme tenancies being applied was 29% above rent limits provided. I'm satisfied that, in general, the HAP scheme continues to operate well in a challenging rental market, but I will continue to keep the matter under review.
One question, one answer.
In my area, it's not working, okay? The rents are so far ahead of the limits that if you're told to get HAPs, you might as well pack your bags for the hub, if you can get into the hub, and there's a queue for that as well, right? So you need to answer the question for the people who come into me, who've rung 50 places, I exaggerate not, I tell people to take note of it now, or 80 places, who are facing eviction, or who are in a hub, and they're ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. Within the limits, slightly over the limits, nothing, right? They can't get anywhere. By the way, the number of HAPs tenancies Dún Laoghaire have secured this year has plummeted. Plummeted. So what do you say to the person who finds a place that finally will take HAPs, but where the uplift required is beyond what the local authority is willing to give, and they can't find anything else? And it's obvious from going on daft.ie or myhome.ie that this is the case. What do you suggest for that person? Seriously. Because unless they get the uplift, they're homeless.
The Minister has 1 minute.
Thank you, Lascan Corda, and thank the Deputy for the question. Deputy, I recognise that particularly in Dún Laoghaire, which is the area that you represent, there is a particular difficulty in terms of securing tenancies. I do recognise that. When I look at the data, I can see that. We do have the Place Finder in place to help people who are trying desperately to find tenancies, offering 1 month's deposit, offering the first month's rent. There is potentially a need for using HAP in a different way to help people who really can't find HAP tenancies, and so we are working on that at the moment to see if there's something that can be done to better help people into HAP tenancies over and above what's already been done at the moment. But when we look at the data for Dún Laoghaire and we look at the number of HAP households, at the moment nationally we're securing 353 HAP tenancies a week so far in 2018. So HAP continues to be a very important solution for people who are struggling to have difficulty at the moment in securing housing. But 163 HAPs were secured. 77% of those needed the additional discretion, and that went up to 18%, so they still weren't achieving the 20% that's there in the system in terms of an uplift that can be achieved. And when we look at homeless HAP being applied, when we add in those numbers, it's 190 in the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council area. 26 of those 190 benefiting from the homeless HAP, and which is 96% of the discretion. The average rate of discretion above that is 29%, when there's a 50% uplift in homeless HAP. So when we look at Dún Laoghaire, not everyone is availing of the additional discretion or needs to, and when they do, they're not taking it to the maximum. So there is still room, even in Dún Laoghaire, to get more from HAP.
Now,
thank you.
thank you. That concludes questions. And before we move on to